La pandemia ha golpeado con enorme fuerza a las mujeres de América Latina y el Caribe. 6 millones de mujeres podrían haber caído en condiciones de pobreza extrema. El año pasado hubo una enorme salida de mujeres de la fuerza laboral. La tasa de desocupación entre las mujeres alcanzó al 12% a nivel regional y millones de ellas no han podido aún retomar la búsqueda de empleo, no solo por la crisis generalizada, sino porque están obligadas a atender las demandas extraordinarias de sus hogares, que solo se han vuelto más complejas por el cierre de prácticamente todos los colegios. Si no tomamos medidas urgentes, la pandemia podría provocar un retroceso de una década o más en los niveles de ocupación laboral de las mujeres. Para la FAO está claro que las mujeres tienen que estar en el centro de los esfuerzos y las políticas para recuperarnos económica y socialmente. Tenemos que reactivar e impulsar una profunda transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios. Ahí se ocupan millones de mujeres, desde la producción hasta el consumo de nuestros alimentos, en las zonas rurales, pero también en las ciudades. La FAO hace un llamado a impulsar programas vigorosos de inserción laboral, aprovechando las oportunidades que nos brinda la economía digital en alianza con el sector privado y también apostando a ampliar las oportunidades de empleo rural digno. Hoy más que nunca tenemos que recordar que las mujeres sufren una profunda desigualdad en el acceso a recursos productivos como la tierra, el financiamiento o el acceso a la asistencia técnica. A pesar de su notable papel en la producción, el procesamiento, la distribución de los alimentos que llegan todos los días a nuestras mesas. El mundo post-pandemia no puede volver a ser el mismo de estas desigualdades de género tan profundas. La FAO está totalmente comprometida con esta agenda para convertirla en una realidad.
Yo me levanto temprano, ¿qué es lo que tengo que hacer? Ya a encerrar a las cabras, porque yo no las hago dormir encerradas. Y yo hacer el ordeño y después de eso largarlas. Para poder hacer que eso tengo que morrarlas esa tarde antes los chivitos, entonces si no, no puedo tampoco. Y después ya las largo y me voy a hacer la actividad de lo que es el queso, cuajar la leche, después ya cocinar las actividades de la casa. Y hay gente que viene así y me dice, bueno, véndeme un cordero, yo lo vendo. Digamos, a veces no, por buen precio, pero lo vendo. Y ya con eso compro. A veces así también vienen a ofrecerme, qué sé yo, verdura o mercadería en la casa y vendo carne y compro la mercadería porque necesito para el consumo.
Me dedico a la mañana con mis animales porque tengo cabra, tengo vaca, tengo hijas. Me levanto después de desayunar a ir a sacarle la leche y luego volver a hacer el queso y así cuando tengo que tejer algo ya me pongo a tejer, dedico una hora a tejer y a la tarde sigo de nuevo a otra vez a buscar los animales si no están mis hijos para que los busquen.
Yo soy ama de casa y soy madre de 10 hijos, me dedico a la apicultura y cuando ya tengo que ir a las colmenas, bueno, me voy a las 8 de la mañana así hasta las 10 y ahí vuelvo ya a las tareas del hogar de nuevo. Con las cabras me daban la carne y la leche que crían mis hijos y las gallinas, los huevos y la carne también que sirvió también para criar a mis hijos. Y yo le digo a las chicas mayormente que se junten y que trabajen unidas y así jamás serán vencidas, que tengan su propio dinero, que se lo ganen ellas.
En el grupo familiar trabajamos en el tabaco y luego tengo unas colmenas y también parte de ganadería. En el tema de tabaco trabajo ayudando a mi esposo en todo lo que compete. La miel que yo cosecho es pura y orgánica, que mejora la calidad de vida tanto en mi familia como donde nosotros la vendemos. El sueño es eso, vivir de mis colmenas y tener mi dinero.
Mi nombre es Lirio Lima Segovia, soy de la comunidad trinchera del municipio Porvenir del departamento Pando. Nosotros trabajamos con pulpas de azaí. Tenemos una planta procesadora. Específicamente mi persona va al área del envasado, donde se pesa, donde se envasa y ya se congela el producto para que salga al mercado. Luego, dentro de la asociación, porque no solo ahí termina mi responsabilidad y mi trabajo, sino que en la asociación yo soy la secretaria de Hacienda. Cuando ya llega la época de zafra, si es un día que va a estar bien corrido, comienza a las 5:30 de la mañana. ¿Por qué? Porque hay que hacer, antes de salir hay que hacer el desayuno, porque los niños tienen que estar a las 8 en el colegio. Tengo la buena suerte que ya tengo un hijo de 12 años, los dos son varoncitos y me ayudan en los quehaceres de la casa. Entonces, luego a las 8, porque a las 8, 8:30 arrancamos dentro de la planta el trabajo, que se extiende hasta las 5, 6, dependiendo la cantidad que llegue de fruto, hasta las 7 de la noche. A veces no retorno a mi vivienda todo el día. Creo que contribuye porque mis hijos consumen un alimento natural. Traigo un ingreso más a la casa para ayudar en los gastos. En mi comunidad igual, porque estamos generando empleo, ayudando a mejorar su economía de la gente que vive acá en mi comunidad, y pues a que haya un producto con un costo más accesible para todos.
Hablar de seguridad alimentaria tiene que pasar por una reflexión del tipo de sistema alimentario que tenemos, es decir, de la manera como se producen, distribuyen, se procesan, comercializan y consumen los alimentos. Cuando estamos muy lejos de alcanzar el ODS 2 y el hambre cero, quiere decir que el sistema alimentario no está cumpliendo de forma cabal con el derecho a la alimentación adecuada, y esto tiene un efecto particularmente negativo en las mujeres. Somos quienes recibimos una menor calidad y cantidad de alimentos por temas culturales, pero también por temas culturales tenemos un menor acceso a la tierra. En el caso de México, por ejemplo, de las personas ejidatarias, solamente el 26% son mujeres, aunque la fuerza de trabajo es prácticamente de la mitad. La crisis por COVID-19 hizo más visibles estas brechas, y por eso desde The Hunger Project trabajamos no solamente en visibilizar las brechas que afectan a las mujeres, sino también en cuestionar el tipo de sistema alimentario que tenemos, y en proponer y voltear a ver la necesidad de contar con un sistema alimentario nutricional justo, sostenible, con equidad de género, que permita garantizar el derecho a la alimentación de todas las personas. En este marco de pandemia, ellas y ellos, las personas que viven del campo, no pararon, y eso evitó que hubiera un desabasto o alguna crisis alimentaria como se temió en los espacios urbanos en algún momento. Es por eso que necesitamos voltear a ver esas problemáticas, redignificar el trabajo de las mujeres rurales y lograr construir las condiciones que permitan que alcancen su autosuficiencia, vida plena y vida digna.
Como mujeres indígenas, el cuidado de la cosecha y la de los traspatios es importante para las familias que no tienen tantos recursos de tierra. Los intermediarios a veces son las personas que se aprovechan de nuestros productos en la venta y distribución de ellos, ya que con nosotros pues, no contamos con un mercado de distribución, y pues los pagos a veces no se hacen tan justos. Muchas de las actividades de los alimentos se centran en las mujeres, y pues algo que nosotros decimos es que les compren a los pequeños productores y de las comunidades, y que no regateen los precios.
Mi nombre es Santos Isabel Gómez Domínguez, soy de la comunidad de Azacualpa, Intiucá, ama de casa. Les voy a contar algo sobre el oficio y desempeño en mi familia: cuidar a mis hijos, cuidar a mi esposo. La jornada de trabajo es de 4 de la mañana a 3 de la tarde. Primero hago mis labores diarias en mi hogar, luego salgo al campo a ayudar a trabajar a mi esposo y a mis hijos. El trabajo de nosotros es sembrar papa, maíz, verduras, frijoles, brócoli, coliflor. Esta verdura lo consumimos con nuestra familia, con nuestros hijos, luego lo vendemos al mercado, de ahí se transporta este producto a nivel nacional para que puedan tener para que les pueda llegar verduras sanas, frescas a sus mesas, para que lo puedan, para que se puedan satisfacer de unas verduras de nuestra comunidad, para unirnos a trabajar con nuestras verduras. También los de mejores familias nos enseñaron a hacer un encurtido con nuestras propias verduras. Ya no tuvimos que andar buscando en el mercado las verduras, sino que aquí mismo los consumimos, los hacemos, los consumimos de nuestra misma comunidad. Hicimos unos lindos encurtidos para poder satisfacer nosotros, que no sabíamos, pero ellos nos enseñaron cómo se puede hacer un encurtido para poder nosotros deleitarnos de un hermoso encurtido. También en nuestro trabajo es también, nosotros formamos grupos de mujeres, cajas rurales. Con eso también gestionamos a nivel nacional para que nos apoyen, para poder seguir trabajando unidos.
Soy ingeniera agrónoma. Desde que era estudiante me he dedicado a la docencia y a la investigación. Actualmente me encuentro dando clases en una escuela agraria, donde las tareas principales son los talleres agrarios dedicados fundamentalmente a lo que es la huerta orgánica y el ordeñe de ganado vacuno, fomentando el desarrollo sustentable. Aparte de este trabajo, también realizo trabajo independiente en lo que son la investigación y la instalación de ensayos para evaluar diferentes tipos de productos. Creo que es muy importante formar a los jóvenes en las tareas agrarias sustentables, porque esto les brinda una oportunidad, además de obtener alimentos para autoconsumo, también para poder comercializarlo, manteniendo una alimentación saludable y además amigable con el medio ambiente. Una forma de mejorar nuestro trabajo es que se sigan brindando oportunidades laborales con igualdad de condiciones y que se tenga confianza de que podemos llevar a cabo con éxito todas las tareas relacionadas con el medio rural.
Yo trabajo acá, soy productora de carne ecológica. Tratamos de generar la mejor carne para beneficio mío, de mi familia y del mundo. Mis mejores colaboradores son mi familia en el día a día y en mis colaboradores de campo, en ellos me apoyo.
Soy madre soltera, tengo 2 niñas. Una de las cosas que yo más le recalco a mis hijas es: el campo nos ha dado todo. El campo nos ha dado todo. Gracias al campo somos lo que somos. No quiere decir que porque yo estudié yo me voy a ir y qué pena que no. El campo es un orgullo para todos, el cual tenemos que darle gracias a Dios. Y el que tenga una finquita, o el que tenga algún terreno en el campo es muy bendecido. Yo terminé, he tenido la oportunidad de no venir al campo y yo creo que soy una de las que yo digo, no, yo tengo que aprovechar. Tengo que aprovechar a salir adelante y tengo que aprovechar a ayudar a mi familia, porque soy una persona que soy muy dada a mi familia. Entonces, mientras yo pueda y siga con ese apoyo de banca mía y de mucha gente que me rodea, yo voy a salir adelante. Y en el campo también me considero, dentro de mi familia, ser una de las más echadas para adelante en cuanto con mis cultivos y acá en la finca.
Yo soy dueña de casa, pero hace un año empecé a trabajar en una casa particular, pero nunca he dejado de lado el invernadero.
Yo no tengo horario específico a tal hora, no, porque ella como trabaja, yo estoy siempre acá, entonces de repente por el calor vengo en la mañana, de acuerdo a lo que puedo, y en la tarde también, y ahí están los maridos y los niños, porque por el tema del calor.
Para mí, encuentro que nosotros estamos haciendo un muy buen aporte, porque de partida cuando empezamos ninguna sabíamos plantar nada. Cuando empezamos a aprender del tema ecológico, que no usamos ningún químico, Entonces, la seguridad mía para alimentar a mi familia, o sea, es muy importante. Y más aún si los vecinos nos están prefiriendo y comprando nuestros productos, porque son cultivados súper sanos, entonces yo estoy asegurando que mis vecinos van a tener una muy buena calidad de vida.
Yo también me gusta mucho este asunto de lo ecológico, sabiendo que yo nací con mis papás campesinos netos, agricultor al 100%, pero yo no sabía tampoco plantar las lechugas porque mi papá yo solamente veía. Pero resulta que ahora con este programa aprendí mucho más, aprendí cómo plantar, aprendí tantas cosas que ahora me están favoreciendo, principalmente lo que es el tema familia, que estamos todos juntos. Pero ya tenemos nosotros con el empujón que nos dio Podemos, tenemos el avance esto, que ya. Pero cuando hay más proyectos, igual nosotros queremos bastante apoyo del gobierno, que nos reconozca, que vean que realmente...
Tell us really what you have spoken in the groups, and we just want to hear what you've written here so that we can hear, because we really don't have a lot of time, right? So that we can share this quickly. Group number 1 then, tell us what your solutions are. Group 1, moderator, please, the spokesperson, if you can read your solutions, please. Well, hello, Julian. We're still writing the Padlet. Maybe one of the other groups can begin. Catalina, can you begin? Sure, no problem. Well, we in group 2 talked about developing rules, policy standards, and public programs that can be evaluated, monitored with a gender focus, guaranteeing the participation of women and the participation in the economic and social development. Basically, we felt that the gender approach here is oftentimes not implemented. It is invited, it is talked about, but there's no real follow-up. So the solution, one of the second solutions that we have is developing the technical capabilities in women so that they can be more effectively economically empowered. This is also a view towards multiple means of life. That is to say, not only agricultural work in the more classical sense, but also thinking about tourism, also thinking about craftsmen. And then solution number 3 is creating awareness and education with a community view on educational purpose, but with the cultural approach and with a co-responsibility. That is to say, including the family, including community responsibility, and also the state. We believe that all of these should be made, everybody should be made aware. We should move towards a cultural transformating approach with a gender approach. Okay, so the second group then that has worked on this action track. Oh, my apologies. I had my microphone silenced. Okay. In our group, we also looked at the importance of the regulation and the legislations on food sovereignty, rights to food. But this should not be so just a general law, just a general standard. It be focused on gender and based on the needs of women, and especially for the reduction of hunger for everybody, including women. We also talked about the importance of promoting education, but the second part really talks about a food policy with an inclusive social protection so that we can have economic development. We talked about the digital gap and we need to increase, or we need to bridge that gap so that women can have more access, especially rural women. We talked about the co-responsibility, a joint responsibility, that there is a joint responsibility between men and women regarding food. And we put an emphasis on nutritional education. And then solution number 3, that is to say, with secure agri-food systems, we talked about organotoxins and the risk, and we talked about solutions from the ecological point of view, from agrobiodiversity, but the entry point are the institutions. So we did talk about having a ministry of women, so that we can have policies that promote these kind of actions, like access to credit, access to productive resources, land, and sustainable production and self-consumption. Okay, very good then. Group number 2 then, or group number 3, we really don't have a lot of time. We know that we're a little bit late, but let's try and keep it as brief as possible then. Okay, so in our group, we talked about change to sustainable and nutritional consumption groups. So we talked about the role of women in these responsible consumption. So solution 1 is including the gender approach on the agricultural policies that are sustainable, promoting the participation and highlighting the role of women in agri-food systems. Solution number 2, educating, promoting, and disseminating the participation of consumption organizations, strengthening education and access to information. And number 3, it is conveying, communicating the cultural and ancestry knowledge from indigenous groups, Afro-descendants, and local communities between different generations, the safekeeping, oral communication and knowledge, and understanding that women play a key role in their communities as leaders. Okay, next group then. Promoting a positive production of nature. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank all the people that participated in our group. We had quite a diverse and constructive conversation. Similar solutions to the ones presented by the previous groups. The first solution that we thought about here is focusing on these sustainable agricultural and livestock policies that includes a gender perspective. But in order to achieve those, we have to create certain enabling conditions, like the creation of multi-sectorial group holds with multiple stakeholders, where not only do we have different government institutions and mechanisms that defend women, but also different groups of women that can reflect the diversity of a country. Another enabling condition in order to be able to create these agricultural and livestock policies is not only thinking about governance, but also about the planning, creating concrete plans that will lead us towards getting or visualizing these possible policies. Solution number 2, which runs on a parallel track, because we cannot create a policy if simultaneously we do not acknowledge rural women and their contribution towards a production and promoting their relationship that is comprehensive. That is to say, having intergenerational, multicultural dialogue spaces that can allow for the formalization or the getting together of these groups of women so that we can promote this approach. This was something that was very important in our group. The importance of include young women, indigenous women, Afro-descendant women, but recognizing them, acknowledging them as an agent of change within these sustainable production systems with the environment that can not only be recognized, but also their contributions highly appreciated and considered. And lastly, what comes out of this is that programs and projects can be promoted with a sustainable approach that are responsive to gender. And when we talk about being responsive towards gender, it means that they respect the roles, the standards, the gender relationships, but also the needs and preferences of women in a differentiated way. And in particular, when promoting that, we can promote and guarantee that women have access to certain key resources, financing, technology, and all of the services that they may require.
Thank you, Andrea. Now from the next group, this change, promoting equitable livelihoods and value distribution. And please, we don't have time. Let me reiterate, please be brief, just some pointers. Everything that the group did, all of that is going to be recorded and it's going to be worded as a document, and all that information will not be lost. Now we have to just listen to the highlights here, please. Thank you, Julian. And before discussing the three proposals that across the board, we talk about the need to reduce violence and to recognize violence as a systemic issue in food systems, as well as salary gaps, and also the understanding of food, not only from a industrial perspective or a production perspective, but also spiritual. And that's something much more holistic, as some of the representatives of the indigenous peoples expressed. As to the three solutions, we talk about those solutions that come from public policies, legislative actions or parliamentary actions that can also add that type of vision, adequate funding and specific programming, allowing for that gap reduction, solutions that must go from households or community level, and the recognition of all the contributions enabling farmers to produce, and how to compensate and to make those contributions visible in the case of women, and also from the value chain and how the private sector can generate some space and added value, specific added value, so that the role of rural women is recognized. Thank you very much. Thank you. Group 5, maybe the second group can just add what's missing. Group number 5. Good afternoon or good morning. I'd like to thank all of you who have participated in the group. Just to highlight the 3 action areas that were part of this agreement, and also to say that from the perspective, although it's not developed in the wording, we had an intersectional vision, especially in our continent. So the first action, mostly having to securing access to resources, care services for women, girls and boys, and also allowing their communities to be more prepared when facing crisis. Action 2, more about a legal framework that integrates empowerment and gender equality, and that must respond to the sociocultural gaps that exist, land violence, among others, and how these gaps will be affected vis-a-vis these changes, or vis-a-vis the risks. And the third one, mostly associated to engagement, and it's important how these laws must be also part of the design, and also should consider women in all their diversity in formulation of laws, plans, programs, and activities. And if it were necessary, to ensure gender quotas for this engagement in a nutshell. Thank you, Elena. Group B, belonging also to group number 5. Yes, okay, thank you. We had a very, very fruitful discussion, and we added, we're going to mention a 4th solution, sort of a bonus track, because we feel that we could not neglect this aspect. Just telling you that these solutions must all be leveraged through affirmative action. And in that sense, one of the big solutions has to do with social protection policies and care policies protection for rural women, with gender sensitive budgets that strengthen resilience, valuing the economic role of women in care, etc. And that these resources should also be decentralized, because what we saw is that they remain at the central level, and they did not reach the local governments and the territories. Another item is strengthening the organizations and women's cooperatives, especially in a COVID context in which we need to funnel resources for the emergency and post-emergency that precisely are focused on strengthening resilience and capabilities of women, and the work to promote formal and informal women networks and to foster this dialogue structures with an emphasis on Afro-descendant and indigenous women. An interesting case was mentioned about indigenous and Afro-descendant women in Mexico. And finally, support to initiatives related to knowledge management, a better analysis of what are the difficulties, the gaps, the roles that women play, and also the appreciation of what they know and their ancient knowledge. Those are our solutions coming from Group 5B. Thank you. So we can hear now from the English-speaking group, and I forgot Group 4B, right? I think we're also missing those comments. Okay, first, yes, this is 4B. Okay. Okay, go 4B, and we will end up with the English-speaking group, okay? Thank you. Well, in our group, we discussed about 6 solutions, the 3 ones that we voted, or that the group voted for. Is the first one is about public policy, the need to deal with strategic issues affecting women through the implementation of public policy that are comprehensive and innovative, that are sustainable in time, and that address a strategic issue for women regarding non-remunerated workloads, productive projects with gender focus, solving basic problems in the rural context, especially considering the situation of rural women in the different territories. Programs that also should include also the policies of local governments. The second one, second solution with the highest vote was the solution related to the importance for women to have access to resources, and in that sense, economic and financial resources, but also resources such as land, seed, water, technologies, and also increasing investment and access to financing. As a third solution, or strategic solution in this field, information policies, the need to have access to statistical information about the women's condition and situation, running surveys or census in different territories in order to find about women's needs and to provide the information coming from the statistics. Thank you, Viviana.
Okay, Group 6. Thank you very much. In this group, we had about 7 solutions, and we prioritized 3 of them. The first one is related to women's leadership and participation in food systems, and it focuses on enhancing women's movement. We know that Latin America has very strong women's movements, especially of indigenous and Afro-descendant women, so that they can play an important role and leadership in food system, so that they can occupy decision-making positions in major areas within the food systems. The second one was we had a lot of debate around engaging young women and boys in food systems, the education that's needed so that they understand how the food systems work. There was discussions around also nutrition education, but really going all the way to the beginning and engaging young boys and young girls very early on in food systems. The third area of work that we selected was, the third solution was around valuing women's role and recognizing the important role that women, indigenous women, have in terms of conserving resources, indigenous resources, traditional knowledge, thinking about issues around seeds, around breeds, around forest conservation, but really starting to strengthen that and recognizing that important role. Thank you.
I think we have 10 minutes to close the dialogue, and I'd like to invite Jemimah and Eve to give us some remarks about what you've heard, maybe something surprising, something that's missing. Jemimah?
That was such a rich set of ideas. At least what I can tell you is I have heard ideas emerging out of this dialogue that I actually haven't heard in other dialogues. And when I went to the English group, one of the things I said is that the Latin America and Caribbean region have so much to contribute, especially around women's movements, around the role and value of indigenous people and Afro-descendants in managing food resources, but also other natural resources. So it's been very exciting to hear some of these proposed solutions. Very, very unique, very, very deep, and very, very connected to issues in the region. The second thing I would like to say is what happens to these ideas next? What happens from here is there has been a first wave of propositions that have been, in fact, they were released to the public last week. That's being called the first wave of propositions. There has started a process of developing the second wave of propositions. And so what we are going to do with all these ideas that have come up is we're going to send them to the action track leadership teams. So as they develop the second wave of propositions, so that these can be included. And what normally happens is in each of those action tracks, as I mentioned earlier, there is a gender lead who works to make sure that some of these propositions actually get included in the final list of propositions that will go to the summit and pre-summit. We usually can't promise that each and every one of these propositions will end up in the final list, but quite a number of them do end up in the final list because the action track leadership teams are also looking for new ideas, innovative ideas that will make a difference. So as soon as we get this translated to English, and we can talk about that later with the FAO team, as soon as they get translated, and hopefully as early as next week, we are going to be sending these propositions to the action track leaders. So as they start discussing this next wave of propositions, they can include them. So in other words, this has not just been a discussion, it is a discussion that has propositions that we will be moving, that we will be trying to move forward. So thank you so much, Eve, and back to you.
From my perspective, I think it was a very fruitful session. I know the region very well, and I'm still impressed with what we are able to highlight when we're together as women and men who also support women and gender equality. Something that was really impressive, the number of recommendations that have a holistic and comprehensive view and also intersectional perspective about food policy views, for example, that do consider social protection, care, economic development, connectivity, that is becoming more and more a source of larger gaps. So including that is important, and co-responsibility, an example of something that is comprehensive. And in several answers as well, associated with this comprehensive view, considering as well violence issues, violence problems as something that may have a systemic impact. And the importance as well of finding comprehensive solutions, such as the links among women groups that enable finding solutions that are adequate to the diversity of conditions and situations of women, the diversity of generations of women, that help find solutions to develop resilience, for them having voice, and for empowerment at the same time. So finding those connecting points that can create a bigger change through sort of levers that can be used, I believe, are fundamental. And I believe there are several practical examples that are in everybody's heads in this session that cannot be highlighted in these notes. But of course, I hope participants will be able to send those specific examples or practical examples, such as the Casa Indígena that we heard from one of the groups. In fact, there's several like those. I believe those specific examples are the ones that offer sort of a compass for other countries, for other groups and other territories that would like to replicate those. So very fruitful discussion. Last item, the importance of the tools to do it. Specific practices regarding positive discrimination, of funding and financing, of gender-sensitive budgeting, quotas, those practical things, we need to couple it with the big ideas, because that allows us to implement in reality things that may have very good intentions and even political will, but when they translate to the territories, they may be lost. And those are tools that enable the realization in real life. So these were my two main observations about this very rich discussion. And it's been an honor for me to be part of this.
I understand that now we're going to go to the very last part of today's session. We have then Maria Noel Baeza, the Regional Director of UN Women for Latin America and the Caribbean, and I would like to give her the floor for the closure. Okay, Cecilia Alemani, the Joint Regional Director. I apologize, but I'm here on behalf of Maria Noel. So here I am. I would like to thank you all for allowing us to close today's session. We started with high levels of expectations, and we ended all with countless number of ideas. I want to thank FAO and IFPRI for this consultation process. And I believe that we all liked the methodology, the technological resilience too. This has allowed us to really take advantage of the time and to make use of all the capabilities that each of you has. We know that these are the conditions that we have to work under given the context. I want to also thank Julio Berdegué. I do have to say that from the beginning, with your opening words, I conveyed all of that information immediately to Maria Noel, because we were very happy to hear these analysis, the framework, because we know the context that we are discussing today. But on top of that, we have COVID-19, and this has turned it into a very difficult year. So we fully share the diagnosis that you started off with, and obviously the wealth that we can find in all of the proposals that have been presented by the groups. So humbly, it seems like everything has already been said, but I would still like to take advantage of the 5 minutes that I was allocated, because we know that all of the information is now on the table, and we do have a lot of work to do from now on. I just want to reconfirm some of the points that were mentioned. First of all, well, the unanimously we agree with all of the things that have been said. But the first thing having to do with the discriminatory frameworks. Julio talked about access to land, but all of our recent analysis go to demonstrate that we still have quite a high percentage of laws that are discriminatory for women's rights in all of our region. I mean, we can go at another point in time, we can analyze which they are, but they have to do with income, access to work, the non-recognition on social security, as well as household care. So in spite of the fact that Latin America and the Caribbean has made progress regarding laws based especially on violence, gender-based violence, it is not the same when we talk about women in work participation in formal economy, knowing that 80% of the rural economy is informal and women-based. That means that we have to rethink social protection and care, which has become obvious given the COVID crisis, but we are still quite distant from this joint responsibility that we've talked about. So from UN Women, ICLAC, all of the countries that are somehow better understanding this have already started talking about the role that women play, not only in economy, but also in trying to have more equality for the economic power or equality. Julio talked about the setbacks that women have experienced given all of these current situations. So we know that all of these require extraordinary responses. This has come up in the different action tracks that you have just presented. So in closing, I just want to say that we have a whole set of proposals and recommendations, and I will send them to you so that they can be included or considered on top of all of the proposals that were presented by the groups. But I just want to reconfirm some of the topics that I believe were not addressed so deeply or as deeply out of the work that came out from the group work. So on the one hand, the need, I mean, we talked about improving the budget for food security, obviously with accountability and a gender approach. We know that that is important, but it is important also that we know that the agreement that was signed regionally in Santiago from all the ministries of women, we talked about promoting counter-cyclic policies in order to promote the funding and the financing and budgets in order to promote equality. And this should also be done for commitments at the national level with food that have a gender approach. We are in an exceptional situation. A year ago, March the 26th, last year, with all of the team from UN Women, we were carrying out an analysis of the crisis on women. And one of the strong dimensions that was already being mentioned, aside from the traditional ones, the domestic violence, the loss of means of life, and loss of employment, is precisely one of the things that you talked about. We saw that with high levels of concern. The increase on the vulnerabilities and going back or moving back into situations of hunger. We have a 10-year setback, but in the worst possible conditions, as Julio mentioned at the beginning. It is a moment to try to promote exceptional measures. Let's not just assume that this 10-year setback is such and take it for granted. We have to do something about it. It is also important to acknowledge that this weakness that many of the rural women that are part of the food systems suffer are because there are standards that go beyond the national status, but that can be corrected. For example, the commercial agreements that put them even more at risk, or even sometimes the changes of the power matrix that does not always consider the impact that this has on the environment, but also on the capabilities and means of life and the food systems that women have and that they participate in. I believe that we need to guarantee that in the negotiations of these international agreements, when it comes to productive transformation, we must include not only the environment, but also a gender perspective. As Eve has said, in Latin America and the Caribbean, when we talk about gender equality and when we talk about women, we talk about overlapping sectors because indigenous women are underrepresented and face multiple discriminations. So just one example. And my boss asked me to share examples with you, and I'm going to share just one. In Guatemala, we have worked a lot with the community protection networks. They supported each other. It is always important to consider all of the resources, all of the networks, and to provide resources for growth and strengthening. 240 women provided each other support and they promoted access to services and resources for an additional 1,000 women. And this has all to do with all of these proposals for strengthening networks and strengthening organizations of women in rural context. In closing now, I know that I have so much information still to share, but just one additional point that I want to talk about. We're trying in all of the strategies for COVID-19 recovery strategies that we're going to see from here in the future years, whether they be for economic recovery or stimulus or tax related, we want the entrepreneurial ideas of women to be reinforced, not only from the point of view of recovery, but also to promote, for example, a public procurement with a gender approach so that we can truly include them in these COVID-19 recovery packages. We have countries in the region in which the food systems should be able to have women as the first choice of suppliers for state procurements so that they can work, maybe they can present themselves as co-ops or associations or groups. And I'm not talking about isolation, I'm talking about measures that will allow for strengthening capabilities in the territory, and they need to be designed jointly with the territory. So when we work on these measures at the national level or centrally speaking or in the capital cities, but also when we're working together with governments, we're working on the new bills and laws that are still in discussion in several countries. This is often thought about for urban women and do not always consider the challenges and issues that rural women face in all of the cities and rural areas in our region. So it is not just advocating for decentralization, but it is advocating for the strengthening and the voices of those women's organizations that are there out on the field and are excluded in some of these national solutions that are presented. They can not be included later on. Also, when it comes to the bridging or the reduction of the digital gap that was mentioned, we are more than willing to help and to continue working while we get closer to the summit. So thank you so much for listening to me. No, thank you, Cecilia. Very important points. And this last point, precisely on this trend that we have to think the world through the urban lens implies that part of the transformation requires a change of mindset. Oftentimes we think about gender stereotypes. Sure, women and as the people who are responsible for food, sure, that's part of the change, but we also have stereotypes on the role of women, especially with as actors with employment, with formal employment, with connectivity that does not always apply to many women, especially the most vulnerable and poorest women that have often been left behind, and they are critical. They have always been throughout history. They've been critical in the conservation of our food heritage and as the carers of the environment. Thank you so much for your nice words. Now, we are at the end of this dialogue, and we want to leave the floor to... Sorry, we've heard from all of you, and I know that this has been extremely short. The comments that we heard were so interesting. I loved it that we had from the different points of view, from Afro-descendants, indigenous peoples, from the academia, from the parliament, from the United Nations. We've had quite a good representation for a first session, but I think it has been quite excellent. And we've heard a broad diversity of proposals, and I hope that this diversity also reflects the challenges that we face. This dialogue has been only the first step towards action. And for me, I am absolutely sure that they will feed the global debate on the summit of agri-food systems. So today we reaffirm our commitment towards inclusive food systems for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I believe that our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, is or should be a champion promoting gender equality, transforming food systems, and also for the transformation of food systems on food equality, gender equality. Thank you so much, and I hope that you have an excellent rest of the day. And see you soon.
And